El Carmen, the 70-1 victory. Now that's a title that grabs your attention, isn't it? We're about to dive into one of the wildest, most lopsided military victories in history. It's an incredible story of huge risks, terrible miscalculations, and a result that just seems completely impossible. So let's just get right to it, because this is the big question. How on earth does an army lose a battle 70-1? This isn't just a simple defeat. We're talking about total annihilation. How does a force with superior numbers get so thoroughly outplayed that the casualty ratio is, well, that? This isn't a whodunit, it's a howdunit. And yeah, look at these numbers. This right here tells you everything you need to know about the scale of this thing. On one side, you've got about 7,000 Bolivian casualties, killed, wounded, or captured. And on the other, barely 100 Paraguayan losses. It's insane. So to figure out how this happened, we've got to look at the battlefield itself. All right, Section 1, a paradoxical battlefield. You see, the stage for all this, the dry, unforgiving Chaco region back in 1934, was this really strange place. A place where what you thought was your greatest strength could, in a heartbeat, become your biggest weakness. And what we've got here is the classic David versus Goliath story. I mean, it's perfect. On one side, you have Bolivia. They're the Goliath. They've got more soldiers, more gear, more of, well, everything. They were the big guys on the block. And then you've got Paraguay, the David. Outgunned, totally under-resourced. But, and this is a huge but, what they didn't have in stuff, they more than made up for in smarts, audacity, and just plain brilliant thinking. So what was Bolivia's big strategic centerpiece? This fortress, Ballivián. Now, politically, it was a huge deal, a symbol of their power in the Chaco. But from a military perspective, oh man, it was a total disaster. It was an anchor, all right? An anchor that was dragging their entire army down to the bottom. And get this, 18,000 soldiers. That's how many men Bolivia parked there. A huge chunk of their army just sitting around, basically becoming a spectator army. In military strategy, you're supposed to be efficient with your forces. You know, economy of force. Bolivia was doing the exact opposite. They were just wasting this massive resource. Okay, so while Bolivia is literally stuck guarding a fortress, the Paraguayan commander, a guy named José Félix Estigarribia, he's looking at his own situation. He's got nothing to lose. His weakness is actually forcing him to be bold, to be audacious. And boy, was he about to roll the dice on a massive all-or-nothing plan. You see, Estigarribia was smart. He knew he couldn't just sit there and trade punches with Bolivia. He'd lose. He didn't have the men, he didn't have the supplies, he just asked for 500 trucks and was told no. So he basically told his president, look, if we wait, we lose. Period. We have to risk it all on one single knockout blow that could completely change the game. And this was the plan. It was just, wow, a work of art. Think of it like a 3-act play. Act 1, rupture. Don't hit the strong parts. Punch a hole right through the weak middle of the Bolivian army at a place called El Carmen. Act 2, persecution. Once the army split, go after the guys who are now forced to run away from that big fortress, Ballivián. And then the finale, Act 3, annihilation. Swing the entire Paraguayan army around and just demolish the other half of the Bolivian forces, who are now totally alone and trapped. Now, a plan this crazy, this complex, it's all built on a foundation of surprise. And for surprise, you need intelligence. You need to know what the enemy doesn't know you know. And how Paraguay got that intelligence? Well, it's the kind of story they make movies about. I mean, this is just wild. To find a secret path for this huge flanking move, Estigarribia sent patrols deep into enemy territory. We're talking near-suicide missions. And the order was simple. Do not get into a fight. To make sure they could survive out there, the soldiers carried more water instead of extra ammo. Think about that. They literally traded bullets for water. That tells you everything you need to know. But then, the whole thing almost fell apart. On one of these patrols, a skirmish happens and a soldier goes missing. Vanishes. Estigarribia slams the brakes on the entire operation. He has to. Think about it. If that one soldier is captured, if he talks, and who wouldn't for a sip of water out there, the secret is out. The entire war is probably lost. The fate of his country is hanging on this one guy. And then, 2 agonizing days later, he just stumbles back to his own lines. He's safe. The operation is back on. Incredible. So the plan is a go. The Paraguayan pincers start their silent march, and this is where we get to the fatal mistake. The moment of absolute catastrophic miscalculation by the Bolivian command. So imagine you're the Bolivian commander. you start getting these weird reports. Paraguayan soldiers spotted way, way behind your lines. It doesn't make sense. You see these two movements on the map, these two arms closing in, but you don't see a trap. You see a distraction, a simple diversion. You think, they're just trying to pull our attention away. They couldn't have been more wrong. And this is the moment it goes from a mistake to an absolute disaster. The Bolivian commander, Colonel Moscoso, instead of saying, "Whoa, let's pull back and see what's happening," he does the opposite. He orders his divisions to turn and counter-attack these flankers. He literally marches his men into the open jaws of the trap. It's hard to even believe. So you've got the Bolivians marching straight into the trap, and the Paraguayans are racing to close the door behind them. You'd think Estigarribia would be celebrating, right? Nope. At this exact moment of his greatest triumph, the guy who came up with the whole thing was actually filled with doubt. Yeah, check this out. On November 15th, right as his men are closing the ring, Estigarribia isn't finding much resistance. And he's thinking the worst. He's thinking, they figured it out. They slipped away. He actually sends this really pessimistic telegram to his president, basically saying, yeah, I think it's too late. Don't expect much. He thought his huge gamble had completely failed. And the irony here is just beautiful. The reason he wasn't meeting any resistance, it wasn't because the Bolivians were running away. Oh no, it's because they were running in. Not only had the 1st Division walked into the trap, but the Bolivian command had sent a 2nd Division to reinforce them, and they marched right into the last open gap just as the Paraguayan trap slammed shut. He thought he'd lost his prey. In reality, he'd caught 2 for the price of 1. And that brings us to the final staggering number. When that trap snapped shut, 2 entire Bolivian divisions were caught. The total damage? About 7,000 casualties. Just gone. And listen to this. This is from a Bolivian surgeon who was captured inside the pocket. He said, at dawn on the 16th, the discipline had already been lost. We were all mixed together. It was total chaos. Command was gone. Regiments just dissolved into a terrified mob. And on top of it all, they were facing the deadliest enemy in the Chaco. They were running out of water. So the battle itself was a masterpiece, right? But the ripple effects, the strategic consequences, they were even bigger. Remember that fortress, Ballivián, the one with 18,000 soldiers guarding it? Well, with the army in the center completely destroyed, those 18,000 guys were now totally cut off. That symbol of Bolivian power was now a useless, isolated death trap. They had to abandon it in a chaotic retreat. And that mighty fortress, it fell without a single shot being fired. At the end of the day, this whole battle is a perfect, textbook example of what military folks call operational art. It sounds fancy, but it's really just the genius of connecting the dots, linking all your small moves and individual battles into one big, coherent plan that achieves your main goal. Estigarribia didn't just win a fight. He used that one fight to completely unravel Bolivia's entire strategy for the war. Which kind of leaves us with a fascinating question, doesn't it? What really wins wars? Is it just having more stuff, more force, more raw power? Or is it having a better plan, a better story? Because in this case, Bolivia had all the force, but it was Paraguay that had the better story. And in the end, that's what made all the difference.